You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to subscribe to The Authenticity Show if you haven't already done it, wherever you get your podcasts, and to please follow our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. This will help us. This episode is kind of a short one, but it's great. It's about developing compassion in yourself and in your relationships. When we start out mid-conversation, Carlos is sharing a story about Vipassana meditation.
No, it's difficult.
The pain and
it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But there was a certain point at which I felt like I went down inside of myself, and there was a boundless feeling of love that was coming up, almost like I tapped a vein, and there was all this love pressure, if you will, that was wanting to bubble up through the tap. And,
That's
and
awesome.
So I felt like I understood something new about what compassion is. And when I came out of it, when I was still in the glow of Vipassana, I felt like I had a deep sense that even the people that were doing pretty terrible things in the world were actually suffering from ignorance. And I saw it more as they are suffering from ignorance rather than seeing it as they're a bad person doing bad things because they're just nasty.
Yeah.
And so it changed the way I took it. So that silence, 10 days of silence really, helped me to detect and find and activate my awareness of love that was already there. And I felt so much of it. I felt like, wow, if I could live from this place, it'd be much easier not to be feeling antagonistic about the world, about the things that I don't like or the things that don't go well. And it reminds me of some of the ellipsis stuff that I'm doing now, which one of the principles is people are reasons. If you look at people as reasons, then you realize that they, for their own reasons, believe that they're doing what they're doing for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not personal usually. And if you look at people as reasons, that's kind of like when you develop compassion and you see people as human and having an individual and unique path that led them to where they are and led them to being how they are and doing what they do, instead of thinking about that as a personal affront. Just looking at people as reasons is a
That's
much
such
different
a cool
way of,
idea.
Yeah, it reframes the whole
Yeah.
thing, you know? Anyway, so I see a connection between the compassion that I discovered in that melting away of my own block, right? And that love coming up in the form of compassion. I see that connection to the idea that people are reasons.
Oh, I love that. You know what's interesting? I'm going to share a Vipassana story similar to yours. It was my first course. And there was a guy, you get assigned a seat. And the guy that sat behind me...
I didn't get one.
You didn't get
No, I wasn't assigned at all. You just
really?
sat where the hell you want.
Oh, really? Yeah. And no, in my place, we were like assigned a seat. So like I had like a little number and like that was that was my meditation spot for the whole course.
Wow.
So there was a guy sitting behind me who, just to be perfectly honest, annoyed me.
Right.
This guy annoyed me.
Yeah.
Just everything about him got on my nerves. Okay. His clothing annoyed me. Okay. And then the thing is he sat right behind me and he had a cough. He was coughing a lot, right? I'm like, oh man, I start to have thoughts along the lines of, oh gosh, here I am. Finally, I'm coming for this meditation course and I get sat right in front of somebody who's making lots of noise and is bothering me. And then a day or two later, he's coughing a lot. And then a day or two later, I hear him, he's putting cough drops in his mouth. Okay. As everything goes silent, I can hear the cough drop in his mouth clicking against his teeth and he starts to chew it. I'm just like, God dang this guy. Like, why? He's so distracting me from my meditation.
Like you hear the lozenge cracking against the teeth.
And then he'll crunch it, and I'm like, oh man, of all the places, I get stuck next to this guy, right? But it's funny because as the course went on, and I got more in touch with my inner being, and there was less mind, less ego, and it was more reality that was experiencing everything in Vipassana. I started to really appreciate the guy. And as the course went on, I started feeling really good that I could tell that he was getting better. And, the little noises and things that he made, I sort of looked at them more with a sense of comedy, kind of like he was just a character in the story that I'm in. And it was really not that big of a deal, and it was just funny to see my own transformation of this guy who was annoying me to, viewing him as sort of a little companion.
Well,
we never spoke.
It's like a reminder of why he's there in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, he's there in spite of feeling sick.
Exactly. Yeah.
He's there in spite of his cough.
Yeah.
He's there in spite of the fact that he probably has difficulty focusing his mind.
Yeah.
And there's something kind of interesting about looking at it that way.
Yeah.
It becomes less of a problem, and then you start to look for other things that might be more akin to kindness or sweet feelings towards someone. But you have to start somewhere. It's hard to just jump into that for a lot of us. It is for me anyway, to go from being really irritated to just suddenly loving that person.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Well, my annoyance with the sounds that he was making were my reasons for being there.
Yeah,
too. Because here I am. Why am I doing this?
Good
Why am I
point,
learning this meditation? So that life can have more peace, And so I could be more at ease in the world. And what better training grounds than be practicing meditation with somebody who's making noises behind me, So, silence, is maybe
that's why it's golden.
That's why it's golden, yeah. And maybe that's the starting point right there, is silence.
Yeah, and to get at the gold, you got to dig deep.
Yeah, I love that.
Have you ever read any of George Pransky? He's a PhD. I'm not sure if he's a marriage and family therapist.
No, I don't think
what
I
he
have.
is. He wrote a book called The Relationship Handbook.
Okay.
And it's really good. It was a recommendation from a few mentors of mine that I respect, who all kind of unanimously said, this is a great book on relationships, and if you really were to read it and actually practice it, you can pretty much fire your therapist.
Ooh.
It's not necessary.
Wow.
Because you just put it into practice. And you reminded me of some points that the author illustrated in that. One was, he was talking about what compassion is, because the underlying principle of this relationship process, you could say, is that it's called high mood counseling. So instead of doing family therapy or relationship counseling that's focused on what's wrong, which is low mood counseling, right? Hey, tell me what's going on. How do you feel? And how did that make you feel? And then what happened? And then what happened? And then what happened?
Yeah.
And what would you like to say to that person right now? And blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
Let's improve our communication.
Yeah.
Which doesn't improve the relationship. In fact, if anything, it can speed you on to a divorce or a breakup. So most of the time,
makes sense.
when people go to relationship counseling, it's kind of a red flag that your relationship's going to end. This presumption that if you just communicate better, it's going to get better. That's actually a false premise. There's really no basis in that. It is good to be able to communicate well, but you can communicate pretty nasty things really well.
Yeah.
His whole approach is about raising the mood between you and remembering why you fell in love in the first place and activating those parts of your consciousness that are centered on not idealizing the other person so much as humanizing them.
Okay.
Because when things start to break apart and there's resentments building up, in a way, part of you dehumanizes the other. You start to think, they start to become a problem. They start to become the aggressor. They become this nasty person or a bitch or an asshole or whatever it is that you start to get worse and worse into this negative space.
Yeah.
And the more you tell yourself about it, the more you get clearer and clearer on why you're upset at each other, the more so that you dehumanize the other person in a way.
Yeah.
And a lot of what compassion is, as we know, is really moving into acceptance of why a person might be the way they are. It's a deeper understanding of that person and finding something to love about them. That's a bigger picture kind of reason. Like working together towards a certain thing or being a stabilizing force in life. And there's a lot of reasons why you might move into compassion. And since most people start off feeling a lot of empathy for each other, that empathy can be a slippery slope to where you buy into your own feelings of needing to be empathetic towards them. And then when they start to not reciprocate or you feel like they're not there for you, or they're angry at you, then you feel regret that you had so much empathy, because it feels like your wound or your heart was wide open and they wounded you while your heart was wide open.
Yeah.
It becomes very personal.
Yeah.
So to illustrate his point about developing compassion, he used the example of a father and his 5-year-old. And the 5-year-old gets sick and is complaining with an earache. It's very painful. And the father's a little bit annoyed and alarmed, but mostly kind of irritated that he's not getting any sleep. So he says, okay, this is my son. I love my son. Let's just go to the hospital. Let's see if we can get this figured out. So they go to the hospital, and he's crying and screaming the whole way. And really, he's kind of shifted his perspective. He's starting to say, well, it's not my son's fault, and, how would I feel if I were 5 years old and I didn't know what was going on, and I had this excruciating pain in my head that I couldn't get rid of? I would probably cry and yell too. And so he's able to open his heart, and he's able to not be irritated anymore. He takes the child to the emergency room for a night visit. And as he sits down to wait, the boy continues to cry and cry and cry. An older man with bandages on his head comes up and is like getting really irritated, huffing and puffing. And can you please quiet your son? It's really making my head hurt. Well, the father's first response to this old man is to kind of flare up and be like, excuse me?
Yeah.
How dare you? Like, you talk to me like that, and that's my son, right? And then he talks about how, the author speaks about how he had zero compassion for that man, but for his son, because he felt like he understood his story, he had lots of compassion. Arguably, each one is about the same. I mean, they could, either one could be considered irritating, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
So then he says, well, what will happen if he begins to ask himself, well, how is that old man experiencing this person he's never met before, screaming his head off while he's got a head injury and he's bleeding, and he's probably been waiting there for an hour already.
Yeah.
And as soon as he started running himself through those scenarios, his feelings of defensiveness and protectiveness just started dialing down. And as he started dialing that down, he began to relate and say, wow, what would I feel in that situation? He began to think, we don't know what that man has gone through outside of this injury. We don't even know how the injury happened. We don't know what's going on at home or who he has, if he has someone who, like, he's not with anyone, so maybe he doesn't have a loved one. Maybe he lost his wife. He starts to imagine all the possible things that could be there.
Yeah.
And not only that, he begins to dial down even further. Suddenly his heart opens. He begins to feel a sense of compassion for him. He begins to feel loving, kind thoughts toward the old man. And he illustrated all these details to basically say, you can talk yourself into being more compassionate. There are infinite resources of compassion inside of you if you apply this principle of humanizing that other person, understand their struggle, open yourself up, and you can shift from being really, really angry to being neutral to being, more friendly, and friendly can move into love, and love can expand into compassion. It's like a sliding scale.
Yeah.
Simply by shifting the perspective little by little, it opens up. So I just thought that was a great
Oh, that's
thing.
lovely.
So he recommends
like
doing
that.
this with relationships so that you begin to remember that there's another person who has a whole life path, a whole struggle, a whole road that they walked on that makes them who they are, and you fell in love with that person.
Yeah.
So you remember why you fell in love with that person by, in a sense, talking yourself through these gear shifts, I guess you could say, back into a place where you can love them again and have a change of heart. Because he says, you're not going to solve this by arguing it out. You're not going to solve this by communicating better about why you're irritated or pleading with the other person to change their behavior, because you can't change other people, really. The only thing that can improve the relationship is if you both have a change of heart. You take responsibility for managing your own sense of security so that that other person isn't the source of your insecurity.
Yeah.
And then from that place and reminding yourself why you fell in love and being compassionate, that's a workable position. And you can bond and connect with anyone, really, if you do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to be totally alike.
Yeah.
To get along. You can be very different and get along really well.
Yeah.
If you do that.
I love that idea. One of the themes I'm seeing in that idea is the concept of whatever track you're on, there needs to be a moment where we stop. It's like I'm going down track A, which is irritation, going towards being more adversarial, right? And at some point, there needs to be an opportunity to stop that path. And then the second piece that I'm seeing is go back to the center, go back to the basic, go back to the beginning, you know? And you could do that anywhere. You could do it at any time, right? But I just love that. It's like, oh, I'm starting to get irritated with my partner. Stop. Go back to that moment when all things were possible.
Yeah.
You know, go back to the center again, you know? It's like, look at the compass and say, hey, wait a minute, we're lost. Where's north?
Right.
You know, oh, north is that way. Okay, we had to stop for a minute, get our bearings, figure out what direction it is that we intended to go. Now let's just actually start going there. You know, that was beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah, you get back to the magic again, you know? It's like that song, This Magic Moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go back to that.
Jay and the Americans.
Yeah, is that who that is?
Yeah, Jay and the Americans. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a cute song.
Yeah, that's lovely. You know, it's interesting for me, because my wife, Tanya, is quite disabled, right? I have many times, you know, I mean, many times this year, and it's only late January, right? I have reminded myself who this person really is. You know, who is this person? Who was the person that I chose and who chose me? You know, and that's always a wonderful starting point.
Yeah.
If things get tough, it's always easy to go, hey, wait a minute. We chose each other, and think about that time, that moment when that choice was made. You know, and all of those reasons and all of those feelings and everything that happened in those moments in the past are still happening. You know, I always think there's two ways to view the past and the future. One way is that they don't exist. The other way is they're not even past and future. They exist right now.
Yeah, they're happening.
You know, and I think there's a time for each one of those angles. And
Happening and ever present.
yes, correct.
Non-locally, but here.
Right. It's sort of like, you know, the infant once upon a time that was Carlos is still here. Yeah, see, exactly.
Yep.
You know? So yeah, it's that whole issue of time, you know, but we kind of started this by talking about silence, you know, and to me, silence is one of those great beginnings. It's that great neutralizer. You can always go back and go, okay, wait a minute. Now let's go from here.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. My name is Oliver Althoen. I record, edit, and produce the show. I also wrote our theme song, which you're listening to right now. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, follow our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening and have an authentic day.